Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Downloaded over 150 times, find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
I know that many of you listening are well along in your marketing careers, but for those of you who aren't, if you have one takeaway from this show, it should be that a career in marketing need not be linear to be amazing. Once you have the foundational training, you can apply your skills across industries, move from the agency world to the client side, and even go back home again, assuming you haven't burnt your bridges. My guest today is Kathy Davis, who has had a remarkable career starting at Leo Burnett, followed by client-side roles at Morgan Stanley, Harris Direct, and Diageo, which is when we first met.
Right.
Close to 10 years ago.
Right.
Which is...
We're getting old.
Yes, well, that's goes without saying. Since then, she's been the president of Visium, a media agency which she helped launch and eventually sell to Aegis. Is that the way you pronounce it?
Dentsu. Aegis.
Dentsu, Aegis.
Yep. They actually owned it. So Visium was the 9th largest media agency in the world, but they had not been able to launch in the US. So they were really large in Europe and in Asia. So it was fundamentally a startup within a very large company.
I got it. Right. So then you started the US operation, then Aegis bought you, and then Dentsu bought Aegis, and so next thing you know. Okay. So you did that, and then you returned to Leo Burnett, which is, amazing.
Like home.
Yeah, like nobody does that. And then working on things like McDonald's and insurance. But about 2 years ago, you took on the role as CMO of Feeding America, a nonprofit organization based in Chicago, where we are today.
Yep. Here we are. Right on the river.
Right on the river. Yes, there it is. I'm waving to... So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And, I was trying to remember when we first met, and I feel like it was sharing a cab, maybe from JFK, back from like the CMO Club Summit or something like that.
From the CMO Club Summit, right.
Right. But I couldn't remember, was it LA, San Francisco?
I don't remember.
Did they ever be,
San Francisco?
I don't.
Maybe?
I don't know. But what was funny to me about that moment is I remember seeing you at the event, and there's this senior person from Diageo and being a little intimidated. And so we get in the cab and we have this wonderful, amazing conversation. So just in case you were wondering, this is a career tip for folks. Engage with people in taxi lines.
And on planes.
On planes, because you never know how these things will work out. And funny enough, so after you left Diageo, we did an interview.
Yeah.
I found that article. It's still on fastcompany.com.
Oh, it is?
Yes, it is.
Nice.
8 years later.
Nice
I'll link
long
to...
tail search
No,
thing.
it was a good article. I mean, you had good content. It was a good program. Not that I'm not tooting my horn here. So let's go back to Burnett.
Okay.
9 years at Burnett. How important was that from a foundation building standpoint?
I think it was really important. I mean, particularly at that point, Burnett was like classical marketing training. We often functioned as the marketing team for clients. For example, at Pillsbury, I did nothing but new product development, no advertising for 2 years, and they paid Burnett to have me do that. So it was a pretty amazing experience. People were incredibly smart. It was very rooted in traditional marketing, and it was an incredible foundation for me.
Yeah, I always think of it as packaged goods agency. I mean, they used to say that Leo Burnett people bled, Kellogg red, and it wasn't Kellogg a big client of theirs, and, the whole Tony the Tiger, though, all the mascots that they created. But it reminds me of probably a similar experience that I had at JWT, where it was sort of the university of advertising, and you really learned how to do, as an account person, how to do strategy. Because this
Absolutely.
was long, well, at least for me, it was before the world of account planners, so you actually had to be smart to be an account person. But you learned, you were trained, right? Okay, so then you've done Burnett for 9 years. You jump to the client side.
Right.
Why?
So interesting that you just mentioned account planning. So I went to a conference, and I remember Richard Kirschenbaum from Kirschenbaum and Bond talking about the fact that that account people were no longer going to be strategic because of planners. And I thought, if I can't be strategic and I don't play that role, then this is not a job that I want to do. So I had gotten recruiter calls for ages, but I'd never actually answered one. And I got one and decided to talk to them, and it was Discover Card. And it was an opportunity to do advertising, marketing, better define and position the brand, because at that point they were really the fourth player in the category and in an incredibly strong credit card category. And strategic alliances with retailers, public relations. So it was a truly integrated marketing job, and it would allow me to do the things that I love to do.
And you were prepared for that job in a sense because of all the work you had done.
I think absolutely. I think it's how we were taught to think at Burnett.
And then you did financial services for about 6 years. How did you make the jump into alcohol and Diageo? That must have been sort of some selling on your part.
Total serendipity, actually. So, I loved my boss, right? They were looking for a skill set. It's in many of my jobs, I would say, my bosses have felt like they had a whole building full of people with experience in whatever the category was, whether that was credit cards or investment banking or brokerage or retail brokerage or liquor. And what they really needed at Diageo was somebody who understood marketing, somebody who could position brands, someone who understood how to work with creative teams to get breakthrough creative on the air. And liquor at that point was not allowed to be on television, except at some point in the middle of the night. And so actually one of the things that I was proudest of is my boss and I sat down and said, okay, what is the biggest thing that we can do to grow this category? And I said, get liquor on TV. And we actually got a meeting set up with ESPN in some dark Chinese restaurant out of the way, because we didn't want the beer people to see us having the conversation, and figured out how we could get on the air. And that changed the category.
That would. And it's funny, that seems like a long time ago. And I just, recent episode with Jonathan Beamer of Monster, and they had gone off the air 10 years ago, and the brand had basically been forgotten. And it's amazing. They are back on television again, and it's still a viable channel. So it's just fascinating that those things come together. But okay, so you do the Diageo thing. You can read the article. We'll link to it in the show notes. Did some interesting things online with the bar. The
bar.com.
The bar.com, which is really cool. And that sort of was a bridge that sort of helped you be perceived as someone who understood not just offline, but online. But when that ended, you had some soul-searching moments. There was a period in time where, and this was sort of at the recession was going
2009.
on. Right. And that was a tricky period. Because the next opportunity didn't magically appear.
Mm-mm. No, and interestingly enough, two different people came to me at exactly the same time, with the opportunity to run a media agency. And I had never been in media. I'd overseen media departments, but I couldn't write a media plan by any stretch of the imagination. And so I really thought about it. And what I found so interesting about the whole thing was, first of all, it was when content was starting to become more important, and media agencies being able to develop content was key, and technology had gotten increasingly more important. And so as we started to identify the clients that our early clients and clients that we already had, the Pernod Ricards, seventh generation, we were very focused on millennials. And so that meant content marketing and digital. And so when most of the category was probably 18 to 20% digital, we were at 40, and did a huge amount of content creation and comms planning, which was one of the fundamental building blocks of Aegis. Kara was exceptionally good at that, I think. And so that's how we defined ourselves as an agency.
So what's interesting to me is you took a leap of faith that you could do this. What made you think that you could do this job?
I don't know. I mean, I think because I've gone to work in so many different categories, right? When you start to realize that there are all these similarities, whether you're talking about financial services or liquor or Sonos, electronic equipment, at the end of the day, how you market is the same, right? And so it's still about understanding your target audience, identifying what your value proposition is, and figuring out your compelling business proposition. And at the end of the day, that's the same category to category. And so as I thought about building a new media agency in the US, which as I think about it now is crazy because that's all about scale at the end of the day, it felt the same to me, is developing our consumer proposition and our business proposition, identifying what our key skill sets are, and then creating a point of difference in the market.
And, so I look at that and I just say, again, I go back to, if there's a lesson here, if you're early in your career, make sure your early years are formative, that you are getting good training, that you are working for smart people, that you learn a discipline that you can be comfortable with, because then because you're a problem solver. You know how to dissect something. One of the brilliant things that I've always enjoyed about having started my career working on TV, packaged goods brands with television ads, is that you had to reduce all this data down to 15 seconds of magic. And that
single ideas,
and single, sometimes big and profound ideas, because when they were big and profound, they actually worked. Anyway, all right. We're wrapping up this segment. The Visium has been sold. Why go back to Burnett?
So when I had moved from Discover Card to Morgan Stanley in New York, I had thought I would live in New York for 2 years. And I ended up staying in New York for 14 because New York's an amazing place and people are so smart. I mean, it's an incredible place to live. But at the end of the day, Chicago's home. So I wanted to come back to Chicago. My friends are here. A lot of my family's here. And as I started talking to people in the market, Burnett just felt like home.
There you go. Okay, so that brings us to where we are today. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about Feeding America and all of those good things. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back. And my guest is still Kathy Davis, who is the CMO of Feeding America. So talk a little bit, just give the 10,000-foot view of what Feeding America is.
Yeah. So Feeding America is actually the third largest nonprofit in the United States. And we feed 46 million people nationwide.
Wow.
So it's huge, right? 5 billion pounds of food a year. We work with almost every large consumer packaged goods company who have been incredibly generous with us. We work with the top 20 retailers in the United States to identify good food, often wholesome and healthy food that would otherwise go to waste, and get that to the people who need it, who don't know where their next meal is coming from.
And it's Feeding America, so we are focused on America. I mean, how many people in the United States are not getting enough food?
40 million people.
I
know, it's mind-boggling.
It's
right?
staggering.
Yeah.
40 million people. And I was looking at the brochure in the lobby, and I was thinking about, there was one of the articles was a young lady who's, was not, once school was out, because there was no food.
Right. So, because kids get lunch at school.
Right.
And sometimes breakfast.
So, okay. So as the CMO, what's your job?
So the first thing that I did when I got here is we're incredibly good at having quantitative data because we move 5 billion pounds of food, and we have a terrific brand tracking study and a lot of data that lets us know how aware people are of hunger and Feeding America. But what we didn't have was a lot of qualitative information in terms of how people feel about hunger, how much people know about hunger, and how people feel about the people who are hungry. And I have to say, people always ask me what's the biggest difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit, and what surprised you the most. What surprised me the most is that a lot of people blame the people who are hungry for being hungry. And so that's the place that we're starting from. And so our number one role across my brand and communications and marketing teams is to create empathy for the people that don't have enough to eat. And I think part of the reason that people blame people on a good day, I think that the reason is because there are a lot of issues out there that need to be solved. And so people have a lot of decision-making criteria that they use to decide whether to support something or not. And they have a lot of unconscious bias. And so they want people to be working. They want people to be trying to get out of being hungry. There's a perception that a lot of people who are hungry are homeless, which is fundamentally not true. Over 50% of the people that we serve are working, but they just can't make ends meet. So that's fundamentally our primary job, is to make people more aware of the fact that there are 40 million people in the U.S. that are hungry. It's a pretty staggering number, and no one would assume it was that big. Those people don't look like the people that are hungry in Africa. They're not emaciated and stick thin. Oftentimes they're obese and overweight because they are forced to they don't really have an opportunity to make choices, right? They need to eat what is the most, the cheapest, least expensive, most filling food that they can find. And so there's a lot of bias and misperception out there, and that's really our first job.
It's interesting. Boy, a lot of thoughts going through my mind. I know the empathy. So the insight that you really focused on was empathy and the need for empathy. And I imagine that there's a tremendous amount of embarrassment also among the recipients of this, because they also feel some guilty about it and wish they weren't in this situation. So you have this situation where the people who might help them feel like the people that need it are at blame, and the people who need it feel like they are too. So it's a really dangerous, sort of bad combination of things. So as a marketer, how do you change perceptions of, getting people to be more empathetic for 40 million people who are essentially malnourished? I guess if that was a word.
If that was a word. Yes.
Yes, I just turned.
You just created a new word.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is people don't think about populations, right? As nonprofit and issue-based marketers, people tend to default to how many people, the numbers, the statistics, which is fairly easy to dismiss. But what people can't dismiss is real people and individual stories. I mean, if you think about what happened a couple years ago with the refugee crisis, people knew all the numbers. They knew that there were hundreds of thousands of people who were fleeing, but it was one dead child on the beach that started to change the conversation, because people didn't think of refugees as people.
Right. They
thought of them as people who were going to come in and potentially threaten their jobs and things. And it's the same thing, I think, for any issue. You have to take it down to individuals, people that feel like you and me, that we could face exactly the same issues. The difference between being potentially hungry and being stable is between $250 and $500. It takes one car repair for a lot of people to put them out of whack, right? And so I think it's about having people better understand it and being able to relate to a single person. So as part of our network, we have 200 food banks and 60,000 points of distribution, which include food pantries and mobile pantries and soup kitchens and those kinds of things. And helping people to experience that or at least start conversations about that is critically important. One of the things that we measure is intent to support. And that's a more quantitative measure. That's asking people who, whether they would potentially volunteer or advocate or share something digitally or donate. But at the end of the day, I just want to have people have conversations. I don't care if I can measure it or not. If somebody didn't understand that kids don't have enough to eat during the summer because they don't have lunches, and you start talking to your child's teacher or the person that you carpool with, then that's raising awareness of the issue. And that starts to create a conversation, because nobody wants kids to be hungry, right? At the end of the day.
So is there something in the marketing that you've been able to do in the last 2 years that you think you sort of look at and say, I'm proud of this, and that sort of crystallizes some of the strategic thinking into an action, a thing that you did?
So I think there have been a lot of them. At the end of the day, my line is always be a human, right? Because I think oftentimes people tend to be kind of academic about things. And when I first got here, I would be reading an email and think, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. What is food insecurity? So if you're not talking at a level that people can understand and that's human, then people are not going to connect with you. You've given them an opportunity to dismiss it. And so we've looked for lots of different ways that we can start to tell stories and bring awareness to the issue that have ended up being incredibly successful. So, for example, last summer, we hadn't really talked all that much about summer hunger for kids. And we wanted to do something that would stand out in the marketplace, that would take a different approach to it. And so we worked with the Ad Council and Facebook's creative team and created an ice cream truck that went around the United States, visited our food banks, and really started to raise awareness around the issue of hunger. And we saw huge increases in awareness, in intent to support, in revenue, because people just hadn't put it together. I hadn't put it together before I came here because I don't have kids. That in fact, summer means no food. And so that's one of the issues that we've been doing a lot to raise over time. We also just did several spots with StoryCorps. Their audio, some of them are animated as well, which works really well on social media, but some of them are not. And they're just two people telling their story, a father and a son, or a mother and her son. And they're just beautiful stories of what happened when the hurricane hit and they're used to providing for their family and they can't do it and they have to ask for help.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we're going to talk more about marketing.
Okay.
Gee, what a change for Renegade Thinkers Unite. We're going to talk about marketing. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Drew. I have a question for you, the audience. How good is your content? We all believe in content marketing, but is your content good enough for you to share it with the CEO and want him to share it with his peers? Is it good enough for your salespeople to share with their prospects? Heck, is it good enough for you to share it with your mom? If the answer to all of those questions was no, well, it's not that good, and you're also celebrating things like National Donut Day, it's probably a good idea to do a content audit. And I know just the person to help you out with that. Text content audit to 917-679-8852. That's actually my cell phone. And we can talk about how to get your content to be world class and do all the things that you know it should be able to do. So you can text content audit to 917-679-8852. And let's figure out together how to get your content to cut through.
Okay, we're back, and for those of you who have been listening along, there were a couple examples of storytelling that we're going to include in the show notes, so you don't have to frantically search Google while you're walking or in your car listening to this episode. So, and I guess, again, just in case you fast forwarded and skipped everything else, Kathy Davis is the CMO of Feeding America, which is the third largest nonprofit organization in the United States. Let's step back for a second and say, what do you see as the sort of biggest differences between being a CMO at a nonprofit and a for-profit organization?
I think it is very much the same, right? You're still trying to persuade people of something. You're defining a brand and the service that you provide, trying to make people more aware of it, and trying to get people to participate in it. So I view it in many ways the same. What's great about it is that when you have a bad day, you know that you fed someone, right? Because we're raising awareness of an issue that needs to be fixed. It's kind of crazy that it happens in the United States.
Yeah, this anecdotally, I haven't seen Crazy Rich Asians, but I understand there is a scene in which the Crazy Rich Asians are eating and the kids aren't finishing their meal, and they throw out the line, well, you better finish it because of all those starving kids in America. And, you know, it's said as a joke.
But it's not.
But it's not.
No. 1 in 6 kids
which
is hungry.
So, you know, all these folks are laughing in the movie theater about that. And, you know, there's nothing funny about it at all. So, but somehow or other, okay, so we've established the differences. In some sense, psychologically, you just feel better no matter what happens because you're helping to solve a major problem. And that's really what this is. This is a big leap. And
I think the other difference is that when you're working on a for-profit, you're thinking in terms of quarters and years. Mm-hmm. When you're working on an issue, it could take a decade, right? Because you're looking at basic overall societal change. And if you look at all the big movements over time, they've taken at least a decade and sometimes 2. So it really is a long game.
And so you know you're providing food for a large amount of people. How do you know you're sort of making progress? Because the reason that these people don't have good food in their lives, healthy food in their lives, is not about the lack of availability of the food. It's about either, one, they don't know about the nutritional issues. That's one possibility. And 2, they simply don't have the financial means to solve that.
Which is what happens most of the time, right? I mean, so the way that we measure progress, first of all, we look at how many people we're able to feed. And we look at how many pounds we're able to get to them and distribute. What's become more and more important over time, I think people think of food banks as doing canned food drives, which we sometimes do. But actually, our objective is that 65% of the food that we distribute are foods that are called food to encourage, right? So they're healthy foods like fruits and vegetables and protein and dairy, which are becoming a bigger and bigger part of what we distribute. That's also significantly more expensive because they're refrigerated, they're perishable, and you need to get them through the distribution system more quickly. So, does that answer that question?
I think so. And so, all right. You come in 2 years ago.
Yes.
You look at this as, in some ways, that's very similar to marketing challenges that you faced. But it's certainly the measurement. How do you, as a CMO, what's on your yardstick that you say, okay, to the board of directors, I've accomplished this. Therefore, we've
right.
You know, right? How do you manage their expectations? What are their expectations, and how are we doing?
Right. So first of all, we're focused on basic awareness of Feeding America, which is at about 50%, and we've had a terrific uptick over the last 9 years. We rebranded ourselves 9 years ago, but 50% is still just 50%, right? And so where we're really trying to go is into the 80s so that we're more comparable to a Make-A-Wish or some of the other groups. So we look at brand awareness. We look at emotional connection to the brand. We look at intent to support Feeding America. And I talked earlier about the fact that that's volunteering, donating, sharing something digitally, or advocating for the people who are hungry. But separately, we also measure passion for hunger because we want to solve the issue overall. So what's interesting is we've been measuring it for about the last 10 years, and we've hovered at about 34 to 35% in terms of people who are passionate about the issue of hunger and want to do something about it. And about 2 years ago, about 6 months before the election, we started to see this significant uptick. And it, in a 2-year period, went from 34% to what it currently is now, which is 51%. And so, first of all, I thought it was a mistake, so I made them check the numbers, right, because that's crazy. But then we went back, we verified the numbers, and we wanted to get at why and what was happening. And what we found was that there are about a third more people in the U.S. who care more about hunger than they did. And they tend to fall into very different segments. But what people fundamentally agree on is the need to help people who are hungry. And one of the conversations that we have a lot with corporate partners and people who want to do cause marketing programs and those kinds of things is aligning themselves with the ideal of hunger because it's right for them and their values. And I think depending on the study, it's 64%, 65%, whatever, of consumers expect their brands to take a issue or take a stand on issues, much like Nike did this weekend. And so we actually think quite a bit about whether hunger makes sense for a brand to associate with or not. We're luckily one of the less controversial kinds of issues, but it's still it still needs to be authentic and needs to feel real and needs to be something that their employees feel strongly about.
So if we look at 50% awareness and we want to get to 80% awareness, there's some math here in that it used to be $100 million could get you 90% awareness in the United States.
If it were only that easy.
Right. And be right. And that was a long time ago when that number was accurate. So it's probably 150 million in terms of just raw impressions to get at a high level of reach and frequency, right? You know, yep. 90% reach, 6 frequency. You're a media you have yep. media experience, you know.
Yep. I do miss reach and frequency.
So
yes.
But it doesn't all have to be paid, but we still have to get reach and frequency to do that. So how do you, as an organization, get that? I mean, because that's a big, one way or another, if we look at it in terms of dollars or we look at it in terms of millions of people.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of share of mind that you as a CMO are trying to sort of bridge that gap. So how are we bridging that gap?
So ultimately, because we don't have $100 million, although if anyone would like to give us $100 million,
if you're listening,
feel free, if you're listening.
Yeah.
But we need to get more than our fair share, right? We have to break through. We need to do things that make people feel things, that make people think things. We cannot be wallpaper. One of the things I feel really strongly about is one person is accountable for every message. And while lots of people can have input, one person is accountable and it needs to represent a single point of view. And it can be fit for purpose within the overall context of a brand, but you cannot do things that just make people feel like there's no risk.
So I think if I wrap this up, I would say single voice, stories that deliver on an empathetic level.
Yes.
Told with terrific frequency by real people.
Yes.
That are meaningful.
Frequency is the tough part, right? Because we work with the Advertising Council. They do a terrific job of getting us about lots of tens of millions of media that is donated, but you don't necessarily have any control over the target audience, and you certainly can't do anything about frequency, right? And at the end of the day, if you're really trying to go from zero awareness to awareness, or from awareness to consideration, there needs to be some frequency and some recency in order to do that.
Okay. So as we wrap this up, and we've got some CMOs in the audience who are listening, and one are sort of first question they have is, what do I need to be thinking about if I'm going to consider making the leap from for-profit to nonprofit? What's the sort of one or two things that would really push them over the edge?
I think pick something that you feel passionate about and that you really want to be able to make an impact on from an issue standpoint. So that would be number one. The second is don't assume all nonprofits are the same. They are not. Make sure that you end up somewhere who has a culture that you're comfortable with, and because not all nonprofits are the same.
There you go. Okay. So I'm going to now for the nonprofit market audience, and I always like to wrap up the show with some very clear do's and don'ts. 2 do's and a don't for the nonprofits out there who are not number 3, but might be number 30 or 300 in terms of their approach to marketing.
I would say be really clear about who you are and what you stand for, and execute that in a way that people can't turn away.
Can't turn away. And so that was kind of a do and a don't at the same time.
That was a do and a don't at the same time. I did not follow direction.
But what I loved about this is a full circle, because in thinking about this whole conversation, as much as the business has changed and as rich as the experiences that you've had over the years, the foundational things that you got at Leo Burnett of identifying a strategy, being able to simplify the message, creating both a rational and emotional sort of, if you will, unique proposition for a brand, still is a guiding principle that is so relevant. Even in this world of marketing automation and artificial intelligence and message bots.
Yes, we love message bots.
Strategy matters.
Strategy matters. Understanding your target audience matters. Never assume that they're just like you, because they're not. That was a very easy lesson when I worked at Morgan Stanley and Diageo, because I'm not either a 45-year-old or a 25-year-old male. But don't assume that people believe the same things that you do.
There you go. All right. Well, with that, lastly, what I love is that you mentioned right away you had a brand tracking study. If your business doesn't have a brand tracking study and you're listening to this show, because I probably mentioned this 10 times, I don't know how you are doing your job as a CMO to not have that in it, because I don't know how you're proving your success. Because if they're just looking at last click attribution or things like that, they're missing the rest of the whole bigger picture, which is...
I agree.
Right?
Yep.
Get that brand tracking study. Okay. Thank you so much
That's
for being
it?
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for talking with me.
And so if someone wanted to donate right now or get involved with Feeding America, what would they do?
feedingamerica.org.
Okay.
They can donate. They can identify where they can go and volunteer. They can check out our Facebook or Twitter feeds, engage with other people, just have a conversation with someone.
Awesome. And if you've listened to the show and you go and make a donation right now, and you tag Renegade Thinkers Unite, Renegade Thinkers Unite will match up to $250 of gifts donated as a result of just listeners. How's that for crazy?
That's crazy.
That's Renegade Thinking.
Thank you.
So there you go. We've made a pledge. All right. So thank you, listeners, especially to those of you who have taken the time to write a review, share the show with others. # sharing is caring. But donating is caring too. So we're going to,
yes, it is.
Just a reminder. So as I always wrap up the show, until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.